Hello, I'm going to help you today learn how to start with a center start. You would want to do this with a hat that starts at the top and works its way down. Some socks at the toe start with a center start and work their way up. Some afghan squares or shawls start in the center and work their way out, all of which call for a center start. It can be a little bit fiddly. Actually, it can be a whole lot fiddly. So if you would like to try this with me at home, I'm going to show it two different ways. I have a skein of a skein of DK weight yarn, and I also have 5 double-pointed needles. One of them doesn't match because mine are vintage needles and they only came in sets of 4 back then. So gather your materials and let's try. When I do a center start, I always start with using Longtail Cast On. It doesn't matter what kind of pattern, what kind of cast on the pattern calls for. I like Longtail Cast On for the simple reason that Longtail Cast On casts on and knits the first row at the same time. I start with a slip knot and an empty needle in my right hand, and I'm going to cast on 8 stitches. Usually your center start will increase either 6 or 8 stitches every other round. Depends on if they're trying to go flat or domed, but there will be a steady rate of increase. For this one, we're going to increase 8 stitches every other round. I have cast all of my stitches onto one double-pointed needle, and that's so I can get a nice smooth edge. If you try to cast on 2 onto this needle and 2 onto this needle and 2 onto this needle, it's wibbly. It drives me crazy. So now that I have cast on all 8 of my stitches onto one double-pointed needle, I'm going to slide them to the other end, and as if to purl, I'm going to transfer 2 stitches to an empty needle. Push them to the middle of the needle and let them rest. Pick up another empty needle, pull the next 2 stitches off, push them to the center, and let them rest. Pick up a 4th needle, transfer 2 stitches to the center, pull this needle to the center, and now you have 4 stitches on pickup sticks, essentially. Don't worry about where the tips of your needles are. It will make you crazy. Instead, focus on this line of stitches from the cast on. You want to keep that straight. It is vitally, crucially imperative that you keep that straight and not twisted. So I put my fingers underneath it as I pull it into shape, and I have pulled my needles into almost a hashtag shape, a square. 2 stitches on each. This needle where the yarn is attached from my cast on edge is going to go to the right. Over here on my right hand is the needle where I stopped, and the needle that is in my left hand has the slip stitch in it. These are all kind of wibble wobbly. Make sure you have a non-slick surface underneath you. It will help. I've just put a bath towel down because the first time I filmed this, the scritchy, scratchy noise was making me crazy. I can't imagine how it would make you feel, so I'm redoing it. You're going to pick up an empty 5th double-pointed needle, and again, mine are vintage needles, and they used to come in sets of 4 or 5, depending on where they were made, because different knitting traditions divided this up differently. That I thought was a fun tidbit. So I'm going to take my 5th needle, I'm going to put it knitwise into the slip knot that started this cast on. I'm going to take the working yarn, make sure you do not get the tail, you won't get very far with the tail, and I'm going to bring it around the needle and knit the first stitch. Friends, let me tell you, it does not matter how tight you pull that stitch, it has 0 tension. It's going to be wibbly wobbly. The secret is that when you knit the 2nd stitch, then you give that first stitch an extra tug. And I don't mean so tight you could break the yarn, but an extra tug, and knit the 2nd stitch. It tightens the first and secures it against the 2nd. Now I'm going to keep my finger in the center of that as I rotate it 1 needle to the right. The needle I just emptied will now become my right hand needle, and I'm going to knit across this needle, which is the next one. I just finished with the pink one. I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to put my needle tip into that first stitch, knit. Don't worry about pulling it tight. When you knit the second stitch, that's when you're going to give that a little extra tug. You're going to continue all the way around. Keep your finger in the center if you can, because it will stop that flippy floppy business that makes us all a little bit crazy. Give it an extra tug as you knit the second stitch, and 1 more needle, and I'll be back around. At that point, your pattern should begin increasing at a steady rate. For this example, I'm going to increase 8 stitches per increase round. In this first round, that means I'm going to increase in every single stitch. So I'm back to the beginning of my round. You will notice that my little, if I move my tail, you can really see it. The beginning is smooth all the way around. Really super important. You can't fix it if you get it wrong. So I am going to go into the first stitch of the round. Knitwise, I'm going to knit the first stitch. Don't let it go off the left. Come around to the back. I'm going to go into the back of that same stitch, give it that extra tug, and knit the second stitch to make the increase. Then I'm going to knit in the front and the back of the second stitch without any extra tug, and rotate it 1 needle to the right. You might notice how difficult it would be, or if you've tried, you will have experienced how difficult it is to put stitch markers on here to tell you which is the first needle. Tip for that is when we get back to needle 1, instead of marking the first stitch, which is kind of annoying because the marker will just fall off, or you'll stick it in the knitting and you'll knit away from it, and eventually you'll lose where it is with your eyes. It's very difficult to follow. Instead, what we're going to do is on the next round, we're going to place a beginning of the round marker on needle number 1, and I'll show you in just a second. Knit in the front and the back, knit in the front and the back, and there we are. The first increase round is complete. If the needles get all kinds of tied up, put your finger in the center and let them balance themselves out. Keep your work in the center of the needle if you can, except for the needle that you're knitting on. That will help keep the double points from sliding out. If you have trouble with the needles sliding out constantly, I highly suggest that you get yourself some bamboo needles. I really like the Chaigoo, CHAIOGOO brand of double pointed needles. They work lovely. I have no affiliation with them. I just sold them for years when I had a store, and they just are some of the nicest double pointed bamboo needles I've ever knit with. We're going to start the next round. This is a plain round. So I'm going to knit 2 stitches. And here in the middle of the 4 stitches on needle number 1, I am going to put a stitch marker. Only 1 stitch marker, and then I'm just going to go on. I don't have to put stitch markers the rest of the way around because I know there are 2 stitches in each section all the way around. I don't have to worry about it. But it does help to know sometimes what needle number 1 is. And again, if you put the marker at the very beginning, it would just slide off the needle tip all the time and drive you crazy. So instead, I put it in the middle of needle number 1. That does not mean that right here at the marker is the beginning of the round. This is the beginning of my round, but this is needle number 1. And the beginning of needle number 1 is the beginning of my round. You would keep going following the pattern, increasing at the rate that they have established for you. And when you were finished, you would come back and close this hole with the tail that you left. Now let's explore what happens with 3 double-pointed needles instead. I actually like this technique a whole lot better because it's less flip-floppy, and I am all for the less flip-floppy, and I have knit a lot of lace that starts on double-pointed needles, so I have a little bit of experience with this. I'm going to cast on my same 8 stitches. I'm going to transfer 2 to this double-pointed needle. There's 1/4 of my circle. I'm going to get another double-pointed needle. I'm going to transfer 2 stitches to that one, 1/4 of the stitches. And this needle, I'm going to leave 4 stitches. When I draw this into a circle, I won't have a square formed by my needles. I'll have a triangle. The benefit to this is that when you pick this up to knit, make sure you don't get the tail, but when you pick it up to knit, these 2 are the only 2 needles. There's 25% less tips here to get tangled up in, and I find the triangle shape is much more stable and doesn't flop on me as much. But your mileage may vary. I just think it's good to have options. I still have this divided up into quarters. It's just that I have 1/4 on each of 2 needles and 2/4 or 1/2 of my total number of stitches on the 3rd. Again, I'm keeping my fingers in the middle to keep it from collapsing on me when I don't get tangled up. And I'm going to work the same way all the way around. In this example and the previous example, what we have here is an 8-section hat. Each of these stitches that we cast on, the original 8, is the origins of 1 wedge of your hat. If you had a 6-section hat, you would only cast on 6 stitches, etc. But we're going with 8. 8 is easy. I'm going to begin the increase round. I'm going to knit in the front and the back of this first stitch, pulling the second part of that tighter. I can take my stitch marker and drop it right in the middle of this business if I need a stitch marker to tell me this is needle number 1. But honestly, when there's so few stitches on here, I use my doubled needle as my end of the row indicator, not really a marker, just, hey, Elisa, that's the end of this row. But if you like stitch markers, that would be where I would put it, in between the 2 stitches, now in between the 4 stitches on needle number 1. The downside to working on the triangle is if you stop at this point, you look like you have gone all the way around because each of these needles has 4 stitches. However, we're only halfway around. This one has 4, this one has 4, this one has not been increased yet. So we're going to knit in the front and the back of every one of these 4 stitches. And voila, our increase round is complete. It does not give you any smaller hole here in the center. I just find this shape to be a little more stable, a little easier to manipulate than the square. But the whole key is to keep this center start flat. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you would leave a comment, I would greatly appreciate it. You can follow me. All of my information is at the end of this post. Have a great day and happy knitting.
Thank you.